That's 15.
Respect all, fear none.
Into the upper deck.
Intensity is not a curfew.
Oh, mercy.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
From our respective abodes, it is the MASN All Access Podcast, brought to you by Marymount University. Visit MaryMountSaints.com to learn more about our student athletes and programs today. Paul Mancano, and as always, joined by Bobby Blanco here on the MASN All Access Podcast. Bobby celebrated what had to have been your weirdest birthday ever yesterday. Tell us a little bit about how you were able to celebrate that birthday, Bobby.
Yeah, turning 28 at home in quarantine was definitely a weird experience. It's kind of crazy to think back that like a month ago, celebrating my birthday in quarantine wasn't even on my radar. It wasn't even a far possibility.
Nope.
I thought that, this will be blow over by the time my birthday comes. Like my birthday might be even one of the first times we can actually go out and celebrate. We'll be perfect. Not the case, obviously, but we made the best of it, man. It was actually a great day. The weather was pretty nice. I was able to kind of hang outside for a little bit. Was able to support a local business and grab some breakfast bagels safely, of course,
Nice.
nearby. And my girlfriend, she's staying with me at my parents' house to stay safe. And she went above and beyond the call, Paul. She put together a little scavenger hunt for me around my family's house, which included multiple FaceTimes with different groups of friends, and came together at the end with a huge Zoom party with my whole family waiting to hear from me. So that was really nice. That was really something special that I enjoyed. She made, what could have been just an ordinary day so spectacular, which was very awesome, and I appreciate her so much for that. So it was all in all, considering what it was, a great birthday, far surpassed my expectations considering it was in quarantine. Not too bad of a way to celebrate, considering all things considered.
That sounds like better than most of my non-quarantine birthdays. So that sounds like a good time there, Bobby.
It was kind of like, I don't know if you're a Parks and Rec fan, Paul, or if anyone out there is a Parks and Rec fan, but you know how Ron Swanson is kind of a character, like a very obviously manly character. He likes red meat and drinks whiskey and, likes to make wood stuff, but he loves puzzles and scavenger hunts, which is a funny thing. And he's like, no one ever does it for me, but Leslie does, and I love it so much. And no one's ever done anything like that for me, and it is fun. It's so special. You just kind of go around. She hid little clues across the house, and had me do little games and tricks and stuff, and call friends. So it was really nice. It was cool. It was.
Wow.
No one's ever done anything like that for me, so that was really special.
That is very nice. While you were celebrating your birthday, well, the day before technically, I was watching Dwight Smith Jr. play on MLB The Show. Have you gotten a chance yet, Bobby, to watch any of the players-only tournament on the show?
I have not tuned in. I saw that Dwight did really well. I think he went 3-1 yesterday,
He did.
Whatever day it was, Monday night. And I don't exactly understand. So they're playing 4 games a day in their schedule, whatever it is, and they're only playing about 3 innings. Is that right?
3 inning games. 3 inning games, and it's like a round robin, so they'll play every other guy in the league.
Yeah. I did hear he went yard with Trey Mancini.
He did twice.
And twice. That's awesome. Yeah. No, so I'm not tuned in too much to those games, or really any of the virtual, the NBA did the same thing with 2K. There was a Washington Wizards player on there. I'm a Wizards fan, but I didn't really tune into that either. I don't know. I wish I was more of a gamer, and it's not that I don't like video games. I just don't play them as much. But I also just can't get into watching someone else play them. I would rather be playing and playing along. But typically, I have not.
Typically, I'd agree, Bobby. This is a special case, though. I mean, I'm not even a gamer myself, really, at all. And I'll tell you, I watched all 4 of those games, and I was yelling and fist pumping because I felt like I was watching an Orioles game. Maybe my bar for entertainment value is way lower than it ever has been, and I'm just desperate for something. But I'll tell you, I kind of got into these games. I'm with you. Usually, I never watch Twitch. I had never gone onto Twitch before this, but I'll tell you, I was getting into it. And I recently purchased a MVP Baseball 2005 on my PS2 to get me through this. So I'm resorting to any means necessary here.
Yeah, I only have I brought my N64 with me when I knew I was going to be in quarantine at my parents' house, and I have Triple Play Baseball 2000, I believe.
Triple Play, okay.
It's like one of the last games that Cal Ripken is still on the Orioles, so that's cool. So I play that. I used to play that a whole bunch. I haven't played it yet, but I should probably break that out kind of soon because I am kind of losing, like, outside of work, entertainment. Like, I mean, Megan, my girlfriend and I, we watch TV shows. We watch Families Together as a movie, but I'm kind of starting to itch for something like I need competition, you know? Like we actually just got a dartboard, which is fun. So we're playing some darts, but video games, I should probably start getting into that too. And then also that might get me more interested in watching these MLB The Show games. When does Dwight play next? Do you know?
Dwight plays, what's today? Wednesday, tomorrow night. He plays another 4 games. I think the Braves are in there. A few other teams. It's entertaining though. I'll tell you that much.
That's the other thing too, though. They all play at 9, right? Like I guess because it's the West Coast time, but that's a little late. And by that time, I'm usually already kind of set into what I'm going to be watching or how am I going to entertain myself for that evenings. But maybe I'll make time tomorrow night and catch out Dwight, see if he can go 3-1 or better again. Yeah,
it was pretty fun. Bo Bichette called between games, FaceTimed him with some advice. He homered us himself at one point. He threw a 3-inning perfect game. He called Hunter Harvey the Tiger King, a.k.a. Joe Exotic.
Right.
So it was a good time. Surprisingly good time, I will say that.
Nice. All right. Well, then thanks for that. So I'll check that out.
All right. Got some baseball stuff today. Got a couple more 20 and 20s that we'll get to. DL Hall and Yusniel Diaz, some exciting Orioles prospects. But a couple days ago, Mike Elias spoke with reporters via Zoom on, it was, first off, hilarious to see a Zoom call with all of the writers in their various places and homes quarantined and to see all their backgrounds. I found out Dan Connolly has a signed Simpsons poster by Matt Groening up in the background, so that was maybe the most exciting part of that.
That's pretty cool.
But other than that, he had some updates on Trey Mancini, on the draft, on where and when games could be played in 2020. But let's start with the best news of all, which was the news about Trey Mancini. He was very positive and hopeful about Trey Mancini's ultimate comeback, as he described it. Take a listen.
We've been in constant contact with Trey Mancini. I talked to him this weekend, checked in with him today. I talked to his agent. He's doing well. He's got a major procedure and a major life event, and the recovery is a long one and it's a serious one, but his health status personally, the way that the operation went, and the kind of demographics age-wise and health-wise that he resides in going into this puts him in a really good spot to make 100% recovery, both from a general health standpoint, but also a baseball sense. But it is going to take some time. He's going to be out for months rather than weeks. And I know he's looking forward to talking to you all and to his fans soon. And I'm sure he'll do that very soon and will provide some more personal ends of the details. But with us not knowing what or when this season will start and end, it's really hard for me to put his recovery timeline in the context of the baseball season right now. But as I said earlier, it's going to be a months-long process rather than weeks-long. But we're totally confident in the outcome and his eventual comeback.
Definitely the best news of the entire conference call, saying Trey is in a good spot to make a full recovery based on his demographics, the fact that he's still a young guy. He's obviously very in shape. They feel very good about the fact that he could make a great recovery. Awesome news.
Yeah, that's great news. And that's something like we kind of touched on this a little bit last week when we were talking about MLB's reported plan to play in just Arizona and how it put other players in danger. And, the thing about the coronavirus, everyone keeps saying is that, if you have underlying or health issues that you don't know about, you're at extreme risk of getting sick and virus. And now Trey obviously has something different than coronavirus, but, who knows the state of his immune system right now? He could be a lot worse than he is. He can be in a lot worse situation. So it's good to hear that he's doing well. it is kind of scary to think that it's going to take months to recover as opposed to weeks. But it's kind of one of those things. You have time now. Obviously, there's no rush. We're not playing baseball anytime soon. Take your time, get healthy, do what you need to do. So that's a great update. Glad Trey's doing well. And I hope he knows that everyone back here in Baltimore and baseball fans around the country are rooting for him, and I'm happy to see him doing well.
Yeah, I mean, I pretty much assumed, honestly, that it was going to take months. It still hurts to hear that it's going to take months, not weeks, for him to recover. But still, I mean, the fact that they're this confident that he's going to make a full recovery, and they said we're very confident in his eventual comeback, that he'll be eventually back on the field, not just that he'll be in full health again, but they feel good about the fact that he'll be playing baseball again at some point, which is just great news. All right, Mike Elias also talked a little bit about how they are using this time as an organization to get themselves ready in other ways. They felt like they were, still getting up to speed on everything technological within the organization, so they used this time to catch up a bit.
We're trying to look on the bright side of being able to take advantage of some of this time without games to hit the speed up button on some big picture projects that we had anticipated taking longer, or that are usually confined to the off season, because during the season you kind of have this day-to-day flow of issues that land on your desk, and amongst those are building our internal scouting and information analytics database, which we have really ramped up and is basically up to industry standards at this point already, we believe. But also putting together, we're putting together a player development manual online with video, with coaching literature, pulling all of our information from our video platforms into our scouting database. And there's a lot to keep us busy right now. And then our most immediate item is now preparing for the draft. And, we've launched a big set of meetings this week with our scouting department, and we had our first one today on that front. So we feel like we're in good shape there. But the bottom line is, as a new administration and as a team that we felt, was playing catch up a little bit in the infrastructure department and the digital infrastructure department, we've been able to, I think, leverage some of this time a lot better than we would have otherwise.
I thought it was interesting to hear Mike Elias talk about how they intend to put a virtual guidebook out there, essentially, and basically load up a player's manual type thing with video, with instruction from coaches. I mean, that's good to have in general, but I mean, they're going to have to get real creative in terms of making sure that players are staying up to date and that they're actually maybe developing a little bit, that they're learning a little bit during this time, because so many of these young guys are young and they are inexperienced and they are needing this time with coaches. Maybe some kind of virtual guidebook or player's manual could help in this.
Yeah, and it's also kind of interesting time, and we talked about a bunch about how the Orioles, this is new for them, kind of, not just obviously the situation, but the whole way that they take information and apply it to players. Some of these players aren't used to these kind of numbers coming out at them and how they should be approaching not just baseball, but their fitness and exercising and their approach to the game and preparation. So it is kind of difficult to do that hands-on, when you're, in face-to-face and the player is maybe not really sure what's going on, but doing it from far away virtually is even tougher. And I'm impressed that the Orioles are able to put this together. I mean, it's probably something that, every team maybe should have already, kind of like, hey, in case, kind of an off-season plan. This is basically an extended off-season plan now, right? So, but you never think that you would actually need to do this, or because you'd always expect, hey, if we need to, we can just have the player come down to Sarasota and work out with them at the stadium complex. No, that's not the case anymore. So you need to find ways to not only have guys practicing and training at their respective homes at a safe distance, but also checking in on them and making sure they're doing everything correctly to reap the most benefits from these kind of practices.
Exactly. I mean, they're players obviously go to see individual swing coaches, they go to see individual mechanics coaches and all that kind of stuff during off seasons, but you always want to make sure that they're seeing the right people, that they're doing the right things, they're learning the right habits in a normal off season, and especially now There are so many ways in which they could get off track or just lose their way, or maybe they're training with somebody and they're falling back into old habits, all this stuff. So making sure that they're staying, technical and in a good spot mechanically. In terms of the overall picture of baseball, though, Mike Elias also spoke about the importance of the game and coming back, and why he thinks, as he said, baseball will be ready for us when the world is ready for baseball.
We're really trying to play, and the players want to play, and the league wants to play, but we're also, all of us, very mindful of what the priorities are right now, and that's public health. And so that topic is going to need to be addressed in a satisfactory way before we can conceivably play. But it doesn't mean you can't plan, start to think. And I like the fact that we're hearing ideas, and that people at the league offices and across sports are working on scenarios for baseball to come back this year, because we really want to do it. We want to be a part of returning to a feeling of normal life. We think that sports will mean a lot to people, especially during this period of time, to have something to follow, even though it's just sports and it's entertainment. It's a very important part of our greater society, really across the world. And so I think it'll mean a lot when it comes back, and we want baseball to be a big part of that. So I'm really hopeful that we can figure out a way to do it and do it the right way.
Of course, Mike Elias speaking about the idea that baseball holds a very special place, and sports in general hold a very special place in the culture and in the hearts of Americans. And the sooner they get it back, the sooner that they can heal, spiritually, that we can get to a place where we feel like, we are healing, we're getting back to normal. And as Mike Elias said, sports could be a big part of that.
Yeah, and it's nice also to hear that, obviously, you can tell Mike Elias is itching to get back to playing ball. I'm sure all the players are, but he's saying and practicing the right things. He's putting public safety and health first and foremost, as opposed to putting players at risk just for the sake, and fans too, or anyone who works in baseball or sports, just for the sake of playing some games. We kind of trashed baseball in general last week with their reported plan to play in Arizona as early as late May, and that we just didn't think that was not only feasible but not safe first and foremost. So it was good to see Mike Elias also hear or say that, hey, look, we want to get back just like anybody else, but we have to make sure that the time is right for our players' safety, our fans' safety, and everyone's safety before we actually even think about getting it. But he also was like, hey, we're having discussions. There is talk. There's at least talk. So when that time comes, because, who knows? Paul, the whole thing crazy, but there's no end in sight. It could be in 3 months. It could be in 3 weeks. Who knows? So it's good that they're at least talking about it. That's kind of what I was saying last week of getting the ball rolling. So whenever that time comes, they're ready to hit the ground running. And the Orioles seem like they're prepared for whenever that time does come to start playing baseball again.
And then it gets into the interesting questions of what will happen when baseball comes back and what baseball might look like when it comes back. Somebody asked Mike Elias during that video call yesterday about what he thinks baseball might look like if it does come back in 2020. Here's what he said.
I think our first choice, all of us, will be to play with fans somewhere, and up north versus down south. I think we'd all prefer to be at home, but this isn't a normal situation. So we're going to have to presumably take what we can get, and if something like that, as we've been reading about, if that's what comes first, I would think our spring training facility will be able to host Major League Baseball. We do it in March and February under normal circumstances, but that's all just speculation right now. I'm reading about this stuff in the media like you guys.
So this kind of ties into his last answer about the fact that baseball holds a very special place in America's hearts, and the sooner it gets back, the better. But the other thing is, a lot of people, not everybody, have likened this situation to the situation following 9/11, where baseball was a big part of helping the country heal and helping everybody return to a sense of normalcy. However, those games were played in front of packed stadiums. It would be very strange to have games after this played in empty stadiums, and I'm not 100% sure that a game played in front of no fans that might have some rule changes with players wearing masks, it'll help in terms of entertainment value. I don't know how much exactly it'll help in terms of us getting back to a sense of normalcy, because that will be nothing like any baseball game we will have ever seen.
Yeah, I totally agree. It's not going to be as much normalcy as it is entertainment. There's something to talk about. There's something to do. We're actually seeing live competition and sport being played, which is, I think, in a sense, on a certain small level, that's a sense of normalcy. But like you said, with different rule changes, without fans, that's not really normal. Yeah, it's maybe the first stepping stone, but it's not going to feel the same. But it does give something. It gives fans to watch. It gives people in the media something to talk about. It gives players something to do. Coaches and front office people, personnel, scouts. It helps a whole bunch of people, obviously. But in no way is it going to feel normal.
Yeah.
If anything, it's going to be kind of interesting, because then we'll always be able to look back on this time and be like, hey, remember that weird, wacky 2020 baseball season when they played with masks and stayed 6 feet apart in front of no fans? That was crazy. It's not going to be normal, but it has a small sense of normalcy in the sense that there's at least competition and sport being played. And that would also probably come at a time where we're getting closer to not having to be quarantined all the time. Yeah. And if they're being able to play baseball, probably means we're nearing the end of this whole thing.
And it was interesting to hear what Elias said about statistics in a year that is going to be shortened, and how this is going to be a very different year all around. So pretty much any statistics you can gather from a shortened season like this played in front of no fans are going to be considered an anomaly. But by the same token, I think everybody accepts that. So, it's not like in 20 years we're going to look back at those statistics and I don't know, be angry about them or use them. I think it's the fact that they're understanding, for even the most strident baseball purists will understand that baseball in its pure sense will not have to be played if it's going to be played at all. So kind of letting go of some of the traditions just for the sake of these special circumstances. Yeah,
you kind of have to. You're going to have to link it to a strike season. It's not the same, because baseball back then or in those seasons were played basically in the same way, in a normal way. It was just a shortened season. But when it comes to stats and numbers and stuff like that, you just have to take and even winning championships. It's like, yeah, you won a championship, but it was a shortened season. If you play that season out of 162 games, you really end up winning. You'll never know.
Yeah.
Maybe someone has a breakout year, or the other way around, they have a really bad year. But in a shortened season, is that really a true tell of who this player is? No. So it's going to be, we're going to have to be like really honest with ourselves when we look back at this year, whenever that time comes, and be like, man, this kid had a really breakout season, or this kid really struggled, but it was a shortened season. It was wacky circumstances. You have to take it with a grain of salt and not really hold it against or for anybody.
Yeah. Bobby, 2 weeks ago, last couple weeks we've been ripping MLB in general, but 2 weeks ago, I ripped them for the idea that there might not be a draft at some point this season. They eventually walked that back, so there will be a draft, what they agreed upon. It'll be as short as 5 rounds, no fewer than 5 rounds, but it could be more than 5 rounds. So Mike Elias, of course, got plenty of questions about the MLB draft and his thoughts on the potential changes. He seemed pretty happy with the idea that there will be a draft at all.
Assuming we do have a shortened draft, which all indications are it will be shortened somewhat. We're not thrilled about that because we are trying to fill our minor leagues. We feel like we do a pretty good job late in the draft historically, kind of our group and our approach with some late picks. So we'll be missing out on that opportunities. But frankly, with everything that's going on, I from the Orioles standpoint, I'm personally happy and relieved that we're going to maintain our high picks. Those opportunities will still be available to the club because we actually, if you look at it with the draft order right now, we got 4 picks in the top 75, which is a lot, and we got 3 in the top 40. And then obviously we have the second overall pick. So I mean, that's a huge draft, and if that were to have been taken away from us, that would have been quite a blow. So I'll take that. I think, given the circumstances, even a shortened draft, it's going to be a tall order to prepare for. So we'll just focus on doing a great job with those high picks.
Look, for the Orioles, this draft is of pretty much the utmost importance, not simply because they have the second overall pick, but as Mike Elias alluded to, they have 3 picks in that top 40 or 60-ish, 40 range, and they have 5 picks in a small group of a small window in the top 100 pretty much. So they are very much looking forward to this draft, and while they will not get to make picks in all 40 rounds most likely, I think they're pretty happy with the idea that they are retaining their most important picks in a draft that for them is of the utmost importance.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, it is sad to see that's happened. I mean, we talked about this a couple weeks ago too, Paul. This affects everybody, not just the Orioles. Every team is going to have to go through this. Every team is going to have a shortened draft. Every college player or high school player that is looking to enter the draft and hopefully get selected is going to be affected by it too, because there's only going to be a certain amount of picks actually taken. You're going from a 40-round draft to possibly only 5. So that's a fraction of what it normally is, and a fraction of the players actually being selected. So it's not just the Orioles and the Orioles organization that has to go through this. Every team has to go through this. But, yeah, it is a shame because we have seen Mike Elias have really good success in those later rounds and finding players that they like to stack the minor leagues. And in the second year of a rebuild, that's obviously critical. And he alluded to that, too, that this is a critical time for us, and it's a shame that it's coming. But at the same time, it's happening to everybody. So whoever – it's not just the Orioles being set back by this. The Tigers are going to go through the same thing when they had the number 1 pick. The Mariners, the Marlins, everyone's going to be set back by this. Even the teams who aren't rebuilding are going to be set back by this. So that's something, I guess, to keep in mind when we get to the draft. I agree with you. I'm glad there is a draft. There's no reason I don't think there shouldn't be. If the NFL can do a draft virtually, I'm sure baseball can too. Their draft is pretty much virtual anyways from previous years. And you know what? You can even watch the NFL draft next week. It's a week from tomorrow. See how they do it and build upon it. Make it better. Make it a better spectacle for fans to watch. Get fans to tune in. So I think having that event in and of itself is good enough. Even though a shortened event does set a team like the Orioles back at least a year.
Yeah, and Mike Elias did mention the fact that the NFL draft is being held virtually. And he said he has been in contact with several members of the NFL organizations, maybe the Ravens, who knows, about how they are preparing to conduct a draft online.
It's been really interesting. The NFL is preparing for the draft right now, and I've talked to some front offices in the NFL, and they're having to do it over Zoom and over conference calls on a much tighter time frame. And they have the added element of being able to trade picks during the draft, and so they're having to make a lot of really big decisions, and it's really different for them. But it's something that we can kind of pull it off nowadays. There's really good technology platforms. We can share screens. We can look at video together. We can talk. It hasn't been too bad, and I feel like I've been saying this. I feel like we're as well set up for this as any scouting department, because we've got a staff that prioritizes putting work in over the summer showcase circuit, the Cape Cod League, working into the fall, getting our ducks in a row in the fall and the winter time. And then we also have a dedicated team of analysts in the front office that work on the draft. And those guys do it from video and data, even without this situation. So we kind of have the infrastructure in place to do things that way, to evaluate players that way. And obviously now we're having to rely on that a little bit more than we'd like to, because we're not getting live games. So it's interesting, but we definitely think we're going to be able to pull it off. It's not like we're in foreign waters in terms of evaluating players this way.
You alluded to it, Bobby, the fact that the MLB draft pretty much has been on a conference call. For its entire history. It's only very recently that they've started to put the first round on TV, and even then has not been a huge spectacle. So think that they are pretty much prepared for this draft. And if anything, it'll be easier to conduct simply because it's only going to be, could be 5 rounds as opposed to 40.
Right. And he also said, we have the technology. It's basically the way it's been done up to this point anyways. And look, Paul, if you and I can send a wire from our TV truck underneath Camden Yards across above Utah Street and through a window in the warehouse so you can talk to Adley Rutschman after he's selected by the Orioles #1 overall last year, I'm pretty sure baseball can do a Zoom conference draft in some way or form. If MASN and Alexis can do it, I'm sure MLB can pull it off some way.
That's a great way to look at it, Bobby. But honestly, I'd see it as the other way around. If MLB can pull it off, we can pull it off. All right. Finally, from Mike Elias' press conference, he talked about the type of players that might be drafted in a shortened draft and how that might affect the draft pool as a whole. The idea that certain players who might have been selected in previous years might have to wait an extra year in a shortened draft.
It's going to be tough for colder weather players to get noticed this spring if they didn't make an impression this summer or fall. With a shorter draft, conceivably, it might be fewer high school players that sign. But when you look at the statistics of the draft, it's almost like 90% of the high school players that sign end up going in the top 5 rounds anyway. So if we only have a 5-round draft, maybe it won't look so much different. So we'll just have to see. But yeah, it's hard to think that this will be exactly the same as other draft patterns.
Mike Elias also touched on the idea that because there is going to be a cap of $20,000 on undrafted free agents, he doesn't see a free agency frenzy taking place after the draft is held, which is the intention of MLB. They don't want a free agency frenzy for these guys to give different teams an advantage that they might not have in the draft. So it's pretty much going to be 5, 10 rounds, whatever it is. That's going to be the number of players that enter the minor leagues.
Yeah, and I also think it was interesting that he said we're probably not going to see too many high schoolers be selected this year, which obviously makes sense. They don't have enough tape or high-level experience, more so. I mean, we talk about this all the time, the difference between the baseball draft and any other draft. Because there's so many picks, you don't have to put so much stock into each player. Obviously, when you have a high selection in the first round like the Orioles do, you put a lot of stock into that selection. But, in the later rounds, close to 40 rounds, you don't have to put too much. It's more so restocking the system. It's just adding bodies to your system, and you can reload. In the Orioles case, you can load up on pitchers and up the middle fielders, second baseman, shortstop, and center fielders, position players that they like, and catchers, obviously, with Adley Rutschman. But in this scenario, you're not going to be able to do that. You're going to have to put way more value in each pick that you take, because I think you said earlier, the Orioles are, if the draft is going to be set up the way that it's being reported of only 5 rounds, the Orioles will only have about 4 picks. You have to make really tough decisions on who those 4 picks are going to be. You probably have a good idea, like we talked about, who's going to be number 2 overall. That probably wouldn't change anyways. But then those 3, 4, 5 picks, that's going to come into there's going to be some tough discussions, because you're going to have scouts who really like this guy, and you don't know if who's going to be available, or who else could take him. What positions do you value the most? Where you want to restock? How close is this kid to maybe making an impact at the AA or AAA level? Yeah. And then what's his impact on the major league roster eventually going to be? So it's going to be interesting. That's going to be the trickiest part for Mike Elias and GMs all over baseball when it comes to the draft, is where do they find value? And how are they going to evaluate kids when they didn't have a full season to play this year, obviously, or a barely season at all. So it's going to be interesting. And, kudos, honestly, to the few high schoolers that do get selected. I mean, that means those are some real good ball players that are going to be taken this shortened draft, having only a couple of years of high school ball underneath their belt. That's going to be impressive to see who gets taken out of the high school ranks this year.
And I think maybe the most important factor in terms of making these selections might be the signability of these guys, because if you only have 4 or 5 picks and one of those guys ends up not signing, that's a huge blow. So maybe just making sure that you have these guys in your pocket and they are going to put pen to paper once you draft them, because if you lose 1 or 2 of them, they decide to go back to school after you drafted them, there goes half your draft pool. All right, Bobby, let's get into the guys that are already in the Orioles system. 2 guys on our 20 and 20s. which is a series that we are doing during this hiatus as we look at 20 guys in 2020 and beyond within the Orioles organization. And let's touch on DL Hall, the lefty, 21 years old. He's the number 3 prospect in the Orioles system. Last year in Frederick, up and down year, had a ton of strikeouts, but also a ton of walks. Next year could be a big year in terms of his development.
Yeah, absolutely. And we kind of figured last year might have been a big step too. He had some impressive numbers last year, but it's the injuries and kind of the fluky injuries too. If you remember, I don't know if Orioles fans remember, but he did pitch in the Futures game at the All-Star break. That's the event that they play on Sunday, I believe, of the All-Star game or the All-Star week, just to kick things off before like the celebrity softball tournament. And then he got hit by a broken bat or something. It was just kind of a fluky thing. Health is going to be his biggest question mark, and it's unfortunate that we feel like we say that every other guy that we talk about in this series, and obviously it's going to come into a big factor with our next player we talk about this on this podcast as well. But for DL Hall, he has the stuff. I mean, if he's got a fastball that touches 98, almost 99, can maybe hit triple digits on occasion. Man, that'll play. And a left-handed guy. We talked about how the Orioles for a long time didn't really put too much stock in left-handed pitchers. The most recognizable starting pitcher in the system probably was Wei-Yin Chen all those years ago. And now, obviously, you have John Means at your frontline starter as a left-hander. So DL Hall is one of those guys that they're hoping to become maybe a mid-rotation guy. Obviously, a southpaw helps a lot. He's got really great stuff, but can the health stay there? Can he avoid these fluky injuries and keep progressing? And in a shortened season, whenever they end up getting back to playing ball, he'll be even set back even further because this was going to be a rebound year almost, or kind of adding on after he had a pretty solid year in 2019 that kind of got cut down by injuries. But now with a shortened season, it's almost like he's getting set back 2 years. Yeah,
you mentioned him getting hit by that broken bat in the Futures game. He only pitched 1 inning and somehow found a way to get hit by a broken bat. Very fluky. He also was shut down with a little less than a month left in the season because of an oblique injury. But look, the talent is all there for this guy. He's the number 3 prospect in the Orioles system. You see his stats from Frederick last year: 19 games, 4-5 record, 3.46 ERA, 116 strikeouts, but it's that walk rate that was a little bit too high last year. He's got 4 pitches, basically. A fastball that touches 98 miles an hour. He's been developing a changeup, which we talked about with him in Frederick, that is all the way. He said he can reach back and throw that thing as hard as he can. It'll only go 83 miles an hour. And he's got a curveball and a slider that he's all developing. So really, if he can just hone that. I mean, his control has been kind of something that scouts have harped on, and it shows in terms of his numbers. He actually had a higher strikeout rate, 12.9 strikeouts per 9 than Grayson Rodriguez did. But it's just getting those walks down at this point. In terms of his scouting report, his fastball is scouted as a 60 on a 20 to 80 scale. All of his other pitchers are 55. It's just the control is down to 45. So maybe if he gets to Double-A Bowie, and they're a team that had a ton of success last year in terms of developing starting pitchers between Zach Lowther, Alex Wells, Michael Baumann, maybe he can help bring some of his other stuff along and make that control up to par with where his quality of pitches are.
Yeah, absolutely. And you say the high strikeout rate, that's obviously great to see, and probably a huge tribute to his really strong fastball. But you mentioned his other off-speed stuff that are just a notch graded a little lower, especially and that probably comes from control, and that probably alludes to his high walk rate. You want to see that go down. Hopefully, as he gains more control of those off-speed pitches and are able to use those as out pitches, that walk rate will go down while the strikeout stays the same. If your fastball is already 98, not too much to build on in terms of velocity. You're probably just working on placement and when to use it and setting guys up for your off-speed stuff. That's something DLL is going to have to learn over the course of this season, next year, and a trip to Bowie and maybe even AAA Norfolk in a year or two will help him a lot with that. And hopefully that control improves so his off-speed stuff improves and he can really work off that fastball and get guys out and walk fewer batters.
Yeah, in terms of starting spot, I do have Bowie down as my potential starting spot for him if 2020 were a normal season. I think the injuries were one thing, but eventually he did settle down. Over his last 12 starts, he had a 2.5-ish ERA. So the struggles in terms of his actual on-the-mound struggles were pretty much earlier in the season. So if I'm the Orioles front office, I see his strides being enough to promote him to Bowie right off the bat.
Right. And you mentioned back to the strikeout rate, but you mentioned how he had a higher strikeout rate than Grayson Rodriguez, who you said last week struck out more batters than John Means in way fewer innings. So that's obviously a good pace for DL Hall if he's striking out guys at a rate equal or better to Grayson Rodriguez and John Means. But again, it's just that control. Hopefully, Bowie, he learns a little more. Obviously, they were stacked and their rotation did really well last year. If he can cement a place and Bowie, whenever baseball gets back sometime this season, that'll be a good spot for him where he can maybe slide into the middle, maybe later part of the rotation, because Bowie's stacked. We talked about how there might be a logjam for starting pitching, which is crazy to think about for the Orioles, but a logjam of starting pitching in the minor leagues between Bowie and AAA, and of course the major leagues, who gets called up. So if DL Hall is able to find his way onto the Bowie roster at some point in the season, I agree. I think that's probably will be his starting point if he ends up having a good spring training and remains strong. Look, he's the number 3 prospect for the Orioles for a reason. He has the quality stuff. It's just a matter of getting to that point, and hopefully just over time he gets to there.
And in terms of an ETA, I was a little bit conservative here. I had 2022 down as an ETA. Even if 2020 were a regular season, I think you assume maybe 2020 he's in Bowie, maybe 2021 he's in Norfolk. I think they're going to give him his time before he gets to the major leagues, because he's still only 21. So, no need to try to rush him through the system, obviously, and get him up to the majors by 2021. Yeah,
and you want to build that arm strength up. Again, we talked about the crazy injuries. He also battled an oblique injury late last season. He just probably, if anything, needs innings. He just needs to build up that arm strength, get some more innings in the minor leagues under his belt. There's no rush, like you said. So 2022 is probably a good target date. I wouldn't expect him anytime next year or if we get to some sense of normalcy anytime soon. But when he gets his innings, he builds up that arm strength, is able to go a full season while staying healthy and improving on his off-speed stuff. We should see him in Baltimore in a couple of years.
All right, next up is another guy who struggled with injuries and honestly one of the more fascinating prospects in the Orioles system. That'd be outfielder Yusniel Diaz. He's the number 7 overall prospect, according to MLB Pipeline, within the Orioles system. He's fallen out of a lot of top 100s recently in terms of his overall standing in baseball and their prospects. Back when, you might remember, he came over from the Dodgers organization in the Manny Machado trade. Of course, he was the centerpiece of that trade. Back when he was signed by the Dodgers laid out $31 million to sign him because he was $15.5 million to sign, and then they incurred a 100% penalty to sign him out of Cuba. So they ended up paying basically $31 million to sign him. That's how high they were on him. He honestly was viewed by many as a 5-tool guy. He has all 5 tools, and they're all pretty good. But so far, we've seen just good amounts of each of them. We have not seen any one be a breakout. And at this point, you might need to start to see him develop extra power, him develop extra speed on the base pass, him become a plus fielder, because right now he's just pretty good at everything. And it might not be enough to, get him to rise through the Orioles system.
Yeah, and you mentioned how highly the Dodgers thought of him. I mean, I'll talk about all that money you're giving to a teenage prospect out of Cuba, and the Dodgers have consistently the best, if one of the best, if not the best, farm systems in all of baseball. The fact that they thought so highly of this kid means he's got talent. There's something there. Dan Duquette was able to get him in the Manny Machado trade. The Dodgers were chasing a championship. They needed a shortstop and a power bat. Obviously, Manny was on the block that year. And Yusniel Diaz was the main guy, the headline name in that trade coming back to Baltimore. We kind of gave him a pass for that season. His kind of sluggish start and Bowie for that second half of that season because, you are transferring systems. You're transferring coasts, coming from west to east. So let's give him a year. But last year, it's the health injury. It's the inconsistency. And like you said, he's projected as a 5-tool guy. I mean, I remember our first trip to Bowie, and he looked like a kid, a man playing amongst mere boys. I mean, the guy is absolutely massive, freakishly athletic. Does not look like he belongs at Double A at all. And even when we went back for the playoffs, and we talked about it too. I think at the time he was hurt and was only able to DH. He wasn't able to play in the field. But had he been able to play in the field, Bowie might have been able to win the championship because they could have slotted someone else in the DH spot. But the inconsistency, the injuries are really holding back Yusniel Diaz from being a top guy. Like you said, he's fallen off a couple of top 100 boards, top prospecting boards. But he has the potential to be there. The Dodgers thought so highly of him. The Orioles, I guess I know it's a former regime, but they thought highly of him to be the main guy in the Manny Machado deal. It's just a matter of it all come to fruition. Can he put together a long, healthy season and sustain success over the course of that year at a high level and not just be the 260 hitter that he was last year? Can he be higher? Can he hit for more power, hit a couple more home runs? That's the kind of guy the Orioles are expecting out of him.
Yeah, he played the vast majority of his games at Bowie, a couple of games on the lower levels just to get back from injuries. He did have hamstring and quad injuries in 2019. Here are his cumulative stats: 265 average, 11 homers. He's hit exactly 11 homers each of his past 3 seasons, which is strange. But he's played in fewer and fewer games each of those seasons, which is good and bad. 55 RBIs and 805 OPS for Yusniel Diaz. He has the speed to be a good base runner, but only has a 42% stolen base success rate. So he doesn't exactly know when or how to steal bases. He has the speed to do it. It's just there's an art form to stealing bases. He has always shined on the big stage. That's the other thing about Yusniel Diaz. He hit a home run in the Eastern League playoffs while he was DH. The last 2 springs has shined with the Orioles in spring training. He's hit 304 with the Orioles in spring training over those past 2 seasons. Way back when the Orioles traded for him, everybody was talking about his futures game performance, in which he hit 2 homers in that game and was basically the MVP of that game. So he always shows up on a big stage. It's just getting that consistency. He has to play every day, first off with injuries, but the consistent production is something that he needs at this point.
I feel like he's one of those players that we see what you can do against inferior opponents. Let's see what you can do at a higher level. Let's make the jump to Bowie. You mentioned the home run numbers that continue to increase, even though he's playing lesser games due to injury. Imagine if he stays healthy, and goes to AAA, where we talked about how the home run numbers were up across the board last year at AAA, obviously in the major leagues as well. Let's see when he gets to that level if those continue to skyrocket and continue to live up to that expectation. But yeah, the 5 tools. He's an exciting specimen. He's a marvel to look at athletically. Can he? And we're not even talking about his defensive abilities yet. I mean, he has the ability to be a high-level defensive outfielder, but we've seen him make a couple of mistakes even in right field. I mean, he's been, they projected him to be a center fielder. At once people were thinking that he would be taking over for Adam Jones in center field in Baltimore, and now Bowie has him playing in right field because they can't trust him in center field. He makes a couple of too many errors. He has the arm power to play the outfield in the corner, but can he feel the ball well? That's a question mark as well, even though he has all that speed, and you mentioned the speed then translates also to on the base pass, gets caught stealing too much. It just seems like he needs to put the pieces together. Hopefully, and obviously the shortened season doesn't help, but like you said, he played really well at the start of spring training. That looked like to be a good sign. If we get back to playing baseball at some point this year, maybe he gets into a rhythm and shows what he can do at a AA level, get to AAA maybe later in the year or early to start next season. And I would hopefully expect he should be on the path to be in Baltimore by 2021. That's probably his estimated date of arrival from the beginning. This obviously coronavirus situation throws everything up in the air, but I think that's still a realistic possibility for Yusniel Diaz if he puts it all together and becomes the complete 5-tool ball player that everyone thought he was going to be.
Yeah, I have ETA as 2021. I have his starting spot at Bowie just because of the few at-bats he got in Bowie, and I think that a call up to Norfolk would be very possible. Of course, this is all if 2020 were a normal season, but I think in theory the Orioles would have liked to start him in Bowie, made sure he can be healthy, made sure he can be productive, hit a little bit more than 265, then call him up to Norfolk once he proves that, and then ideally get him up to Baltimore in 2021. All right, 2 exciting prospects that we just talked about, DL Hall and Yusniel Diaz. We've got some more coming we're just about 4 or 6, I don't even know how many, into these 20 in 20s of the baseball's hiatus. So, Bobby, thanks so much for joining us. Bobby_Blanco with an @ sign before that on Twitter. I'm @ Paul Mancano. Of course, the MASN All Access podcast is brought to you by Marymount University. Visit MarymountSaints.com to learn more about our student athletes and programs today. We hope that from wherever you're joining us, we hope that you're safe, you're healthy, you're with your family, and that you're doing okay. And hopefully we're all getting through this at some point. Thanks so much for tuning in, and we'll see you next week.